Hey guys, my name's Chris. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back to another A Glimpse Inside video. This one is one I'm really excited about. This is a coffee table I made with two things that are either polarizing or revered. All right, it's basically dominoes and resin. Now, in the maker community, people love this stuff. They love dominoes because they make assembling projects that much easier, and resin's pretty cool. A lot of makers really like it. Now, woodworkers, not so much. I consider myself a maker. You guys have seen this channel and what we do here. I am a total maker. I am not a woodworker, and I don't claim to be one. Or maybe sometimes I do, I don't know. Either way, I find that if we made a table with both of these things, makers would think it's unreal and woodworkers would kind of cringe, and maybe not. I don't know. You tell me. If you're a woodworker and you think this thing came out pretty cool, I'd love to know. So we're gonna blend those two together. It turned out amazing. Yeah, it was so cool to see this thing come together. So if you want to see the process and how I did it, definitely join me along for this ride. Let's go. Hey, real quick before we get started, I need these two people to get a hold of me. You are the other winners in the 100,000 subscriber giveaway. I've already gotten a hold of, or three other winners have gotten a hold of me, but you two right here, y'all need to email me. My email is down below. Shoot me one within the next week, because if not, I'm just gonna have to redraw. I hate to do that, but hook me up. All right, let's go. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me for this process. I want you to sit back, relax, enjoy this video. It's going to be a really interesting process to see this raw wood turn into something really interesting by exposing these Festool domino joints. I've got some maple and some walnut and some mahogany left over from when I built those 5 dining tables last year. I'm going to cut these pieces down into various lengths. There really is no rhyme or reason at this point. I'm just kind of following my nose. But I am going to make the legs out of maple. I figured the dark top essentially is going to be filled with walnut and mahogany. It's going to be dominated with a dark top. So why not make the legs a little bit lighter to really draw your attention up to the table, because I think it's going to be a really awesome conversation piece. So once I've got my pieces to the final dimension, now time to install some dominoes. I'm gonna do this by clamping down a stop on my workbench, and then I'm going to put these every 4 to 5 inches. This is a little overkill, but that's kind of the point with this build, is to really expose the joinery that I think is gonna be a little conversational and, well, I guess you might wanna say controversial as well, at least in the woodworking community. If you don't know what a domino is, I'll just briefly explain it. It's a loose tenon. Basically, you are gonna router out, you see this, you're gonna route out a hole in the wood, an oval-like shape, and then it's gonna be filled in with a domino. More on this in a little bit, you'll see this process. But before I really get into this, I'm gonna cut these pieces down at an angle. And that's gonna allow me to expose these dominoes. I'm also gonna join them together temporarily and use a Forstner bit here on the drill press to drill a hole oversized, some smaller, some larger, to really expose that domino as well. And you gotta make time for fun. Check this out. Nice. Uh-oh. Oh, no! Very good. That's why they call them dominoes.
Knock over the first one.
Are you ready?
Knock this one over. Knock that one over.
Uncle GJ. Oh, good job! So, believe it or not, this table was being constructed around the holidays. That was my good childhood friend. He joined us that day for a really nice, fun time in the shop. It's always good to get friends and family involved. All right, now back to the build. You can see here, we're going to the drill press again to really expose where these dominoes are gonna be. And again, some of these angles are steeper than others, and some are very shallow, just kind of adding some variety and some depth to how this is gonna be exposed. So one thing I thought would be necessary while doing this, as you see me putting those dominoes in, was to use a slower setting glue. And I'm glad I did, because the process took me a bit longer because of trying to line up all those different dominoes. It took me a bit longer than just gluing up a standard panel. So I'm just gonna let this roll. You're gonna see how this is gonna come together. And in the end, it's gonna look pretty wicked. I did decide to clamp all this up in 2 different separate glue ups. You can see I've got all 3 of those pieces now that are basically joined with 2 each. And now I'm gonna join all those together with another separate glue up. I'm glad I did this too. It took me longer than I realized, and well, I guess it was worth it to use that extended time glue. I'm using it here as well, just to make sure I got enough time. I will say, the result of this is surprisingly satisfying. You can see it all come together. Looks really neat. All right, now that it's clamped up, I'm gonna let it dry for about 6 hours, and then I'm gonna come back with some of this high performance resin by Total Boat. I do wanna thank them as well. They are the sponsor of this video. Everything is linked down below that I use from them, and I have a coupon code as well, TB Glimpse. Put that in checkout, save yourself 15%. I'm using this high performance resin right now to basically seal up the entire piece, all those nooks and crannies. This resin's gonna get in there. That way, when I do the next pour, there will be no bubbles whatsoever coming out of the porous wood. Definitely a good step to take before you pour anything that's gonna be a final product. And once that resin has cured up, it's time to take it over to the crosscut sled and cut this thing to its final dimension. So in the table's current state, I just can't go flooding it with epoxy because that's just not gonna work. So I'm cutting down some 1/2-inch plywood. I'm layering those plywood on the inside edges with some house wrap tape. This stuff is pretty non-stick when it comes to resin. At this point, you see me building a mold with clamps. And I'm gonna use clamps and basically a few screws and then some more tape on the outside to complete this mold. Honestly, just take your time here. Make sure you got no seams uncovered. Leave it to me. I've done it before where I've poured something and then boom, you know what? You got resin on the floor, no good. So take your time here and make sure you got no gaps. So here's a look at the thick set resin. It is a 3-to-1 ratio mixture, meaning you want 3 parts resin to 1 part hardener. This stuff is extremely clear and it works really well, but make sure you follow your manufacturer's instructions. Things like mixing it for as long as it says and then doing what I'm doing here, transferring it into a clean pail and mixing it again for the same amount of time. Doing these steps and making sure you don't ignore what the package says will definitely give you the best results, no doubt. So here we go. We're gonna flood it in. You can see here I'm trying to pour it in this kind of cinematic scene, didn't quite work, but I'm just gonna let it speak for itself. This stuff is pretty cool going on. Enjoy this pour, guys. I'll be back in a minute. So with the help of a heat gun, you see here, it's helping me really smooth the resin out and pop the little remaining bubbles that are still left in there, giving me a super clear finish. Now, it's time for the moment of truth to remove this thing. It's been about 24, maybe 28 hours. I live in a warm climate here in Florida, even at this time of year, and so it cured very quickly down here. But be mindful, if you live in a cooler area, it's probably gonna take a little bit longer to get this glass hard. So be careful. All right, don't go coming at this thing after a day and think it's ready to go. Might need 2 or 3. All right, let's demold this thing and see what we got. Okay, with the thing fully cured, even though it looks so pretty coming out of that mold, you still got to do some more work. So I'm going to scuff this thing up. I'm going to sand it down here on the drum sander, getting it almost all the way to bare wood. The plan is to put a coat of tabletop resin on it as well. That stuff is typically what you would find like bar top resin. I'm going to show you how that works here in a second. And again, you don't need a drum sander for this. You could typically use your random orbit sander and just take a little bit more time. This is just a time saver for me in order to get content out at a decent rate. You can see here, my next step needs to be to trim off these edges. Some of the resin slipped down the edge, but that's okay. We're just gonna make these barely little micro passes here at the table saw. We're gonna clean this thing up pretty nicely. One side, flip it over to the other. I'm actually gonna run it through the initial side again, and then bring out the crosscut sled and just true the whole thing up, getting rid of all the resin on the edge. Trust me, I don't wanna sand that stuff. It's just easier to take it off with a saw blade. So as I'm getting my router ready to put a small profile on this thing, I have a little shop helper. This is my son. He's 3 years old. He's almost about 4, and he doesn't come around too often in here, but this is a pretty cool moment, so I want to share it with you. I left it in. Check it out.
10,
Hey, say hi.
20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 100, 200, 300, 400,
Good job.
500, 600, 700,
Uh-huh.
and 100.
Yeah. What else? What comes up?
1,000.
1,000. That's right.
2,000.
2,000.
3,000.
Okay.
3,000. 4,000.
Thanks for hanging in there with me, guys.
5,000.
Okay.
6,000.
Let's go count. Whee! So those of you that have been longtime viewers, you guys understand, you've seen my daughter quite a bit in this shop, and she, of course, is the highlight of the show. But it was so great to have him here. My son doesn't quite like all the noises in here, and you saw that he was just overly excited to go through his numbers and show me that he knew his numbers so great. Man, I would love to just live in that kid's brain, even if just for 5 minutes, see what's going on. All right, guys, back to the build. Sorry I'm getting a little sentimental here, but he just is such a delight to have out here, and it's just not very often. So after I put a 1/4 inch roundover profile along the edge of the top, we're gonna sand this thing down to around 400 grit. Then I'm gonna flip the thing over, and of course, I'm gonna put the legs on it. But before I do that, I'm gonna reveal, at least to me and you guys at the same time, a little mineral spirit's gonna clean up some of the dust. And this is kind of my first look at really what this thing is gonna look like after sanding it down. Really happy with how this is turning out. Now these legs, they're pretty simply constructed and they're really not much to them. I'm just gonna join them together at 90 degrees to the aprons with some dominoes. However, if you don't have a domino, I've got plenty of table videos where I show you how, really honestly, my favorite method to join table legs to a table is in my 5 dining table video. This and you'd be good to go. However, I'm going to take it one step further to guarantee perfect results. Now, I've got a small batch of the tabletop resin here. I've poured it on and I have let it set. It's a very small batch. It's not quite ready for finishing yet. Again, save your dowels, and you can reuse your cups, by the way, if you take your resin out. That's a little quick tip for you. But then once that resin is cured, I'm going to sand down the bottom, and then I'm going to sand down the top once more with 240 grit sandpaper. I'm going to wrap up a paper towel in that said sandpaper and kind of run around the profile. It's a pretty cool tip. Gives you a flexible sanding block whenever you need one. Use a paper towel around some sandpaper. You'll thank me later. Anyway, moving forward with this, I tried something new here. I put some blue tape on the bottom in hopes that the drips that happen after a tabletop pour would just come right off. So I even put a little bit of paste wax on the tape to maybe help that process. Now it's time to mix some of this tabletop resin. Again, follow your manufacturer's instructions and you'll have perfect results. I guarantee it. Now, this part is always so much fun. And it does make it a little bit easier if you notch a little scraper, kind of like a trowel with like eighth of an inch notches in there. And after you wet your edge, definitely this is a step you don't want to skip. Wet the edge that the tabletop resin is going to fall down. I did that across all 4 of these edges, and now it's time to pour. And once I've done that, the scraper I was telling you about really helps spread the resin around and gets it a nice even thickness as well. This is such a cool process. If you need to, pour a little bit more around the edge. Use your heat gun to dissipate some of the bubbles that you have, but we've done so much prep that this process goes really well. And it's gorgeous. Check this out. So pretty. Now, it's still wet here, and you want to protect your investment. So I have set up a little area where I'm going to put a small piece of melamine over the top. Why? Because in that first pour, an intruder, a little fly got in there. So definitely a little thing to help make sure your pour is definitely perfect in the end. So did the blue tape trick work? Well, yes, but the paste wax was a bad idea. It left little resin bubbles attached to the bottom of the table, in which I had to come back and sand off, and I put a small hand chamfer on the bottom there. So now it's time to finish the legs. I'm just going to use some Odie's oil here. A quick tip is to put this stuff on using some gloves, and don't put it on with a rag. The rag will simply just soak up a lot of it. This stuff is not cheap, so definitely you want to use something that's not going to soak it up when you're applying it. Now, of course, you're going to need a rag to buff it off, because the instructions are just put on and buff off, and that's it. That's all they give you. And it works pretty well, and it really does make the wood pop in just the right amount. So moving on, we're going to attach this table with some figure 8 fasteners. I've just made a few marks around the table, and I'm going to take a Forstner bit and kind of hollow out an area where that figure 8 is going to have a place to live. We're going to screw it down with some of the screws that came with the hardware. Now, the reason I'm telling you it came with the hardware is because, well, they suck. You see that? Oh boy. Hey, just let this be a lesson. Sometimes when you buy hardware, it doesn't come with the best fasteners. Those screws are cheap. Now, the figure 8 fasteners are great, and as you saw, this thing just broke completely off. So, definitely get better hardware. That way you don't have these headaches. So, what am I gonna do about the screw embedded in there that broke off? Nothing. I'm just gonna put another hole right next to it. And honestly, once all the figure 8s are installed, I've taken my tabletop, turned it upside down, I've centered the legs on the base, and then honestly, you just drill a couple of holes, or however many holes you need to attach this thing just right. And I like to do this by hand. I don't like using a drill for this last final process, just because I like to get a nice snug fit and don't overpower anything, and you should be good to go. So through really a lot of procrastination on my part and life kind of getting in the way, this table took me a few months to build. I'm overly excited about how this turned out. I can't really believe it. It's so freaking cool to me. I'm going to show you some cool glamour shots here, and I definitely want to know your thoughts on what you think of this idea, and would you even have something like this in your home or in your shop? And again, of course, I want to thank Total Boat for sponsoring this video. Everything is linked that I used in this project in the description below. Definitely give it a look. So now it's time to bring this in the house. The table they've been using is a little bit bigger, but it's a little too low. And I actually made this table on the channel years ago. And you can't really get your feet underneath it because it has a bar around the entire edge. So this one's a little bit smaller, that's okay. But it's a little more conducive to what they do. Have snacks, you know, do activities, that kind of stuff. You like it? Oh yeah. So how cool was that? You know, I got a really cool table with all this exposed joinery and this resin, and yeah, my kids are gonna be having all kinds of fun with activities, having meals, snacks right there. It's gonna be pretty cool. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. My name's Chris. This has been A Glimpse Inside. Tell me what you think down below about this project. I'd really love to hear your opinions. And again, I always like talking to you guys down there. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care.